Welcome to the Hockey PDOcast. My name is Dimitri Filipovic, and joining me is my good buddy Daryl Belfry. Daryl, what's going on, man?
How much excited to get going again this week?
This is going to be a fun one. It's one of my favorite players to watch this season. I think just as importantly for our purposes here, one of my favorite developments or evolutions to chronicle this season in Thomas Harley becoming and blossoming into a top flight defenseman and doing things on the ice that I think uh, and routinely at that I think are just so rare for the position, particularly from a young defender like him in his first full NHL seasons. And we're going to talk about the team component as well with the Stars and how I think that skill set ties in so nicely to the specific way they play. There's so much to unpack here with Harley. I'll give you the floor to kick us off. And I love doing this because I always say, what's the thing that interests you most? And then you drop about 7 different things on me. And then it's up to me to try to figure out which one I want to tackle first. But I love that because you give me all sorts of options. So I'll give you the floor here.
All right, Thomas Harley has been a player for me where he I studied him last year, and when I was studying him last year, I felt like his rush defense was a real Achilles heel. He was essentially an absorbed defender, and he was using his reach to try to make plays deeper in the zone. So he didn't really contribute as much to the transition game as much as I thought he was capable of. Now you watch him this year and you see his offensive zone play, which we'll get into. You see how he's joining and playing in the rush. I think that's connected all the way through to his rush defending. So his rush defending is connected to his offensive zone play. Because he's so much more confident in the offensive zone and the routes that he takes, he is skating forwards, defending much more often. When he was in the offensive zone last year, I would not say he was tentative, but he certainly isn't what he's doing now. And that then he began to exit the zone early. He'd open up awkward gaps, and then he wasn't contributing as well in transition. So for me, my takeaway after last year was, here's a guy who's big, rangy, great stick, really good skater, but doesn't realize how good of a skater he actually is. And once I seen the rush defense this year, like to open the year, I did another study on him in the first 10 games of the season. And it was like night and day, skating forwards, and then you see it in the offensive zone. And then, like I said, all those things then are connected. So it's not an accident, the way in which he's scoring and generating offense and the type of player and the most confident player that he has now become so quickly. I think it's tied to his application of his skating skill set in rush defense.
Well, that's a really interesting point because I do think all of that stuff is sort of intertwined. And it makes sense that he would have taken a big leap this year because he gets called up essentially during the stretch run last year, right? And then get thrown right into the deep end playing for a competitive team at that's going deep into the playoffs, right? I think it's one thing to come up and make those mistakes with no real stakes on the line because you're playing for a bad team or a rebuilding team where the end result doesn't really matter. In this case, every one of those sort of mistakes or issues that would crop up would become highlighted even more so. And so in this case, he gets this first full NHL season, as I said, and I think that's a big deal. And we're going to talk a lot about the offense here, but I'm glad you brought this up because I think if you want to play off the rush the way he does individually and the way the Stars do as a team, you have to be able to defend coming back the other way, right? Because you're going to create this kind of game environment where it's great that you're attacking downhill, but then when the other team gets the puck, they're going to have counter opportunities, and you're essentially encouraging them to speed up their own game as well, right? So you're almost dragging them into this kind of back and forth. And so it's great that you can attack off the rush, but if you can't defend off of it, then that's going to be a real problem when you get into that conversation of whether it's kind of a point of diminishing returns or whether it's even worth it to be playing that way. So it's huge that he's made those strides in that area this season.
Well, we had this conversation about the Philadelphia Flyers a week or so ago when we talked about them and the way in which they attack the rush. And we talked a lot about the way in which their defensemen engage, how they kind of get in, they're a presence, but then they make good decisions so that the rush that they give up is not better than the rush that they're trying to create. I think we see that with Harley. One of the things with Harley on his rush, when he's attacking off the rush, is he does so primarily through the middle of the ice. And the other thing that he does is he doesn't carry the puck from one end to the other. He does an excellent job of distributing the puck early, and then he'll get it back either on or just after entry, which is an extremely important detail as it relates to rush, both offense and defense. Anytime a defenseman is repeatedly going from one end to the other, they are stopping the forwards at the offensive blue line. There's just no other way around it. If you're coming from behind the forwards, and if you continue to skate it all the way through the neutral zone, every one of those forwards will have to reroute or stop, and many of them stop. So the implication of that is, regardless of how good you are on that entry and the shot that you take, you have now every one of those forwards standing still. So you're now not able to as intelligently and as effectively defend the rush as a team. But because Harley is willing to give it, he keeps the forwards moving. They can time the line. Now the entry depth happens. So now they have the proper spacing. So anything bad happens, or they take a shot and it doesn't go in and the other team is ready to break out, they have active forwards who are able to get on top of the puck. And he is an active player who's also able to get on top of the puck. Everybody's skating forwards. Now it's much, much easier to defend the rush intelligently. So you're not giving up a better chance than the one you were trying to create. And I think that for young defensemen who want to be offensive defensemen, when I see a young defenseman, like I'm talking like junior or even lower, carrying the puck from one end to the other, whatever it is that you're doing, that whole pattern is going to need to be broken, because it's not going to work at some point. It's not going to be as appreciated as it is where you are now. And I think that Harley's development, and when you watch how effective he is and the things that he does, that is a hallmark piece. And I think that's what's given him the space in Dallas to apply that so aggressively as he is now, and so consistently, because he's not putting them in perilous situations.
Well, and why it's an even bigger deal is, it's one thing when he comes up last year and he's playing 15, 16, 17 minutes a night, and they're very sort of carefully designed minutes, right? It's against secondary competition. It's in more offensive situations. Now with Miro Heiskanen getting hurt earlier this season and him having to play a top defense player role, and us wanting, just clamoring for him to play 22, 23 minutes a night, he's going to be put in spots where not only is he having to do it more often, but he's having to do it against better competition as well, right? He's going up against the other team's top players. They're going to be much more adept at attacking off the rush themselves. And so it's going to put him in these spots where it's going to become integral that he can do that, right? And so I think that's a really good shout by you there to start this off, because we're going to focus a lot on all the fun stuff he does offensively. But I think especially gaining the trust of a coach like Pete DeBoer on a team that has Stanley Cup aspirations, it all kind of begins and ends with that, because if he doesn't have that locked down, none of the other stuff is going to be able to manifest itself.
No, and I think another really important point is he's had the space to grow. And what I mean by that is, I think there are situations on teams in which a young player like Harley has difficult time growing and doesn't have the same space to grow because of the configuration of what's going on with the team. With a guy like Heiskanen, he goes out, that opens up minutes and opportunity for him that he would have probably been boxed out with before, and now he's had that space to grow. I don't think you can appreciate the work of now Ryan Suter in his role there. What I love about that is it's a bit of a career arc for Suter, because as we talked about a few times ago, was I felt like in Minnesota, Suter had blocked the development of other young defensemen coming through in Minnesota, because he was chewing up way too many minutes, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a myriad of reasons for that. Now, because of his art, where he is in his career, he's now a mentor defenseman, essentially, who's chewing up minutes very responsibly. and he is mentoring and providing the space for Harley to grow. So I think there is a perfect storm in terms of opportunity here for Harley, who has the space to be able to let his hair down, make a few mistakes, be insulated by both De Boer, who has shown a lot of faith in him, by his own play has also insulated him, but also the partner has created a space for him to grow. And I don't think that that can be understated. And I think that a lot of times defensemen run into interesting parts in their career in which they potentially are just boxed out in the situation they're in. One of the great places to look for this right now would also be in New Jersey, where they lost Dougie Hamilton for a large period of time. That gave Hughes a lot more space to grow. They bring up Simon Nemec. He also has great space to grow and doesn't look like he's coming out of the lineup, but it's perfect storm. Like, you need the space to grow. So sometimes you need a guy to fall out of the lineup, or the team has to trade a piece away to give you that space. And sometimes they just don't do it, or the timing just isn't right. For Harley, the time has been right.
Well, one final thing on the defense, his team metrics in terms of like the actual results and the output when he's on the ice aren't necessarily the best right now. A lot of the individual stuff where you look at how he's defending himself is, and I think part of that is just because there are still some turnovers when he has the puck, which it kind of comes with the territory of the way he plays. And I think also part of it is just sort of all of this coming together in a larger sample size. But you mentioned it, like, I think he's doing such a good job now of leveraging those skating gifts that he has to cover more ground and kill plays sooner rather than sort of sagging back and just relying on that reach. I mean, this is a guy who's, 6'3", like listed at 205 pounds or whatever. He is a big lad, but he certainly moves very well. And so him using that more effectively is huge. Let's move to the offensive stuff and his attacking off the rush and how he sort of fuels their breakout game, because I think that's huge. Because the reason why I've been harping so much on his evolution and integrating him in a bigger role in this team is beyond Miro Heiskanen. They just didn't really have a guy who could do the stuff he does in this regard. And it's so important for the way the Stars want to play. And now you're seeing it all come together where he's top 5 in the league in exits with possession on a per minute basis. He's in the 90+ percentile in defensive zone retrievals, exiting successfully. And there's so many layers to this, right? I think one of them is certainly you see him actually moving the puck himself, and it's usually actually by skating it out and kind of maneuvering through traffic, and he's really adept at that. But what I wanted to focus on even more, because I think it's just as impactful for the way the Stars play, is his movement off the puck. And you mentioned the Flyers conversation we had a couple weeks ago, and we had this little bit in there about how guys like Sean Walker on that team are benefiting so much from the way they're playing, because they're the weak side D who's able to then jump up, sprint up the ice, and turn it into a numerical advantage for them. It feels like Harley himself is benefiting from that quite a bit and making them so much more dangerous as a team.
Yeah, well, it's what I love about what Harley's doing, and it's very similar to why I loved Heiskanen when he first came in the league in his first few years in the league, is he is often the strong side defenseman or the primary defenseman in the retrieval, and then he's also the weak side D seconds later. He does both roles because his skating is so good. So he's a guy, you're going to dump it in the corner. He's going to go back and get it. His skating is excellent. He is able to retrieve the puck. He makes an excellent, ability to escape the pressure of F1. Yeah, like you say, he can, if he needs to, get through a little traffic, he can do that. But primarily he moves it and then he jumps and joins. And when he jumps and joins, he's in the middle of the ice. And what's interesting is a lot of times when you're when it's two separate roles, you have a retriever who's going to start the breakout, and then you have the guy who's the weak side D who's then going to engage. That weak side D often engages starting in the middle of the ice, but then will come down the dot line. And that's where they create, and they become like a dot wide option. They tend to be like F3 type of thing on entries. This is not what Harley's doing. What Harley's doing is he is attacking through the middle of the ice. So once he's in the middle, or he's doing both roles, he goes through the middle of the ice, and that's what I love. And so now he distributes on either side. That's one thing I think is really effective. And he is essentially controlling the middle of the ice like another center. So he's like, he would almost be like in soccer terms, he'd be like, no, there's a striker who's controlling the middle of the ice on that side, but then you have like the middle back guy that's like that guy in the middle that he's controlling that space, but controls the middle of the ice. I think Harley has done an effective job at being that guy where he controls the middle like another center. There's like another layer of a center. There's often times where he does a lot of work where he's F2 or he's F1, but not because he skated it all the way down the ice. He gave it up. He got it back. He's still in the middle of the ice. He creates the entry. Off you go. Where I think he's really effective in traffic is actually after entry. He generates a lot of shots from high traffic areas where both defensemen who he's attacking have converged, and he's finding a way to get those pucks through, which are extremely difficult to do. I think his shooting off the rush in high traffic area is really impressive. Some of the angles that he takes to create shots, some of his goals he scored. There's one against Tampa that it's in your clip package. That's just unbelievable in terms of the whole package resulting in a goal, but also the angle in which he took to create it is really high level stuff. So, he's been able to transfer what is normally for defensemen their escapability work in the defensive zone, and he uses that same mindset also on the rush to generate shot chances. It's quite fascinating, and he doesn't turn pucks over there at a high enough frequency that you would discourage it.
No, and I think that thing that you highlighted there is very important and one of my favorite parts of this. He is generally the guy who goes back and is the primary retriever of the puck, and he's adept enough at playing that puck. But then he's also, because of his size, he's able to quite literally just eat the forechecker, right? If someone's going to come and decides they're just going to hit him, he's able to bump it off to either his D partner or the winger up the wall. Or if he has enough space, he can all of a sudden open up his skating stance, go to that 10-2, shake him a little bit, juke him, and then move the puck up the ice himself, right? So he can beat you both ways in that regard. And what he does really well is all of a sudden, as you see in this clip, right, he moves the puck along, he beats that first guy, and then all of a sudden now he's sprinting up the ice as the weak side defender up the middle and creates something out of nothing. And I think what the Stars do really well as a team on the breakout, actually across all zones, is their work off the wall, right? Their wingers are so good, whether it's a Pavelski or Robertson or Ben, of knocking pucks down, of making plays in traffic in congested areas, and then getting in and bumping it to the middle of the ice, right? And that kind of creates that phenomenon that we always talk about, where a guy like Rupe Hintz essentially has this open runway to basically build up speed and attack the middle because they're dragging so much traffic and so many bodies to the wall with them, right? And that similarly, I think Harley is able to step into that as well. I think part of why he's so effective as that weak side guy is because they're making so many of these plays off the wall that it's essentially leaving that room for him to sprint up the middle, and he's taking full advantage. And you can see him scanning in his zone. Like as soon as the opportunity presents itself to go, he's good. Like he's completely uninhibited in doing so. And that's really fun to watch.
Yeah, I don't think you can be a top 5 team, and I do believe Dallas is in that conversation as a top, like in the last several years, has been one of those teams that's like you would mention them, people would mention them as a top 5 or upper echelon team in the NHL. You just can't do that unless you can exit your zone and dominate the walls, and you've highlighted that. But what I think is really interesting is it's then another layer to have these defensemen. And in Dallas, they now have 2 guys in Heiskanen and now Harley who are adept at being able to do this. And it just creates that, to your point, another layer of a guy who can skate the puck through the middle of the ice and just wreaks havoc on the other team's rush defense, because now you have speed, genuine speed coming from underneath the puck, and with a guy who can make plays. So part of the other problem is there's so many defensemen who are effective when they'll do the similar thing where they'll get a puck on exit, they'll skate the puck between the blue lines, and then somehow, some way, they manage to make a play that boxes the play in the corner. So whether they themselves get skated and painted into the corner themselves, or the play converges on them, and they don't have that next layer of skill to be able to make that next play to the right guy who can then attack. They give the next guy the puck in a part of the ice that's awkward for that guy, who then he gets painted into the corner. So oftentimes, like, you kind of look at the D and joining the rush, and then if of course they turn the puck over and they're not responsible, and now they're giving up a better chance than what they were intending to create. Well, now you're forced as a coach to wonder, like, do I really want this D leading the rush? Like, do I really want him in the rush? Like, just get it and move it to the forwards, because you're causing more problems than you're creating. That's not what happens with Heiskanen and Harley. They are creating so much opportunity because of their ability to make the play to the right guy, to control the middle of the ice, to not stop the forwards at the offensive blue line. And it's a true weapon. And when they get everybody healthy and everybody's playing and they can redistribute the minutes properly, that's going to be a real fascinating team, because they have layers now of people who can create off the rush that most teams just don't have.
Well, I think part of why him so unabashedly just going straight line up the middle works with the configuration of the Stars is that I don't know if you feel this way as well, but it feels to me, just comparing them to some of the other top teams in the league, they have a very sophisticated rush game in terms of their patterns, right? Like, you'll see them, especially with the top line. It's not just everyone occupying their space and you going north south. There's so much east west movement within the attack, right? You've got guys weaving, you pass the puck, you go, you're cutting, everyone's bobbing in and out of lanes. And so for a defender, if you don't have a specific role in that regard, you can really slow down that attack if you're constantly getting involved, right? You're going offside, you're trying to time it right, you don't know where to stand, you're awkwardly bumping into people, you don't have good spacing. And in this case, obviously, if the play is there for him, he is either going to be a shooter or he's going to get the puck and then distribute it from that middle. But even if he doesn't get it, if the forwards have it, him just attacking the middle and going towards the net forces the primary defender to come with him, right? And then that all of a sudden drops the layer of defense back. And then that allows Hintz and Robertson or Duchesne and Seguin, depending who he's with, to all of a sudden execute that more, because they've got this kind of created window that he's afforded them to attack in, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. And I think it's interesting because, so much attention on this Dallas team goes towards that top line, and rightfully so. They've been excellent for many years. I think the addition of Duchesne is an underrated stroke of genius with the way they play, because Duchesne has an outstanding ability to pass the puck after entry, and he's very bright in the decisions that he makes after entry, and he fits alongside Jason Robertson, who are now on different lines, but they play similarly in the way in which they distribute the puck. The type, like, Duchesne also likes to slow the game down. He can make plays to the backside. I think he's really underrated in that aspect. And then, like, guys like Pavelski just figure out where they need to be and how the intelligence level is just through the roof. And so they find ways to contribute based on what's the assets are of the line. And then once you add like a Harley to the mix, you add a Heiskanen to the mix, players like Duchesne, players like Robertson, like, to have a guy that's coming in late who understands timing, or who's coming in as a second layer, who's going to push people back because they have great speed. I mean, they're contributing to the depth of the play, which is so important. You have to have somebody who can create the depth on the entry. Otherwise, you're in big trouble to create entries. And so these guys have defensemen who can do that. Plus, they have guys like Hintz who can do that. And then you have the other players who are primarily entry players like a Robertson and a Duchesne who can make the right decisions. It's just a real recipe to be able to be more sophisticated. Like, I always say that there's, we want more sophisticated offensive rush, and we want people to be able to go east-west. I like the neutral zone delay as well, where the delay is not even in the offensive zone. They don't wait till they're crossing entry. They do it at the red line, and they pull up and they draw the defenseman over, and then they pull pucks in. I love all of that, but you still have to have the players who understand how to be able to play inside of that. And I think Dallas has, in terms of their team configuration, I think that they've done a brilliant job of being able to maximize a lot of those assets.
Well, speaking of that configuration, I want to talk to you a little bit about the idea of playing him with Heiskanen, right? Because before the All-Star break, Miro comes back. They put the two of them together full time for their 2 games, and they look phenomenal together. And I think this builds off the conversation we had when we did the Quinn Hughes episode, where we talked about sort of the benefits or luxury of him playing with a guy like Philip Hronek now, and finally giving him a partner who they can kind of riff together, right? They can play off of each other all of a sudden. Not all the heavy lifting is on him, and that kind of runs counter to the way we've thought about, or NHL coaches have thought about constructing their D pairs, right? Where you put someone who can be a primary puck mover with someone who's maybe more conservative and stays back. And then you've got like a balance, and you spread that throughout your 3D pairs. In this case, the idea of playing them together, I think, is so appealing to me, because not only does it afford a guy like Miro, an opportunity to not have to do everything himself, where he's having to go back, be the guy who stops the puck, play it, break it out, and then do everything else he does for the Stars team. But it also, I think, meshes well with a lot of the concepts we've talked about in Harley's game, where playing him with a skilled puck mover like Miro all of a sudden allows that play where he bumps the puck over and then he can move up the ice to work more effectively, because chances are the team will actually be moving with possession and attacking downhill, because Heiskanen is so good at breaking the puck out himself. Whereas if he's playing with a defense partner who's not as capable, then all of a sudden either Harley has to do more himself, or that's just not going to be as effective, because he's not going to have that opportunity to be the weak side guy moving up as often. So what do you think about that kind of concept of them playing together, the mesh and the fit between those skill sets, and kind of how maybe playing with a guy like Heiskanen would all of a sudden actually make Harley even more effective, even though it kind of might run counterintuitive to the way we think about D pairs?
Yeah, well, this is an evolution of this is like when we talked about career arc before, but this is also like just the development arc of a player. The reason why Quinn Hughes is able to play with Hronek is because he proved, with the mentorship of other defensemen who were able to be there and create mentorship, he was able to prove that he could defend at a level in which he no longer needed someone like that to hold his hand. With young defensemen, that is a part of the process. You can't just come in. So Harley couldn't have walked in the league and dropped in with a player like Heiskanen, because he hadn't done enough of the work yet to show that he could do those other things and take control of a D pairing and elevate to become the primary defensive the defenseman there, play tough minutes with against good lines, where now he's had to do that. When Heiskanen was out, he went with Suter. Suter provided that mentorship. He's now proven that he can do it, and he's capable of doing it on his own. Why is that important? Well, because why couldn't Heiskanen be the mentor? Like, that's a fair question, right? Why couldn't you just use Heiskanen to do that? Well, the reason is because you want Heiskanen to be able to do what instinctually makes sense for him at given times in the game. No different than you want Harley to make instinctual decisions that go on a game. You don't want him second guessing or worrying or wondering or whatever. That's why you put a responsible defensive defenseman with them at the early stages of their career, is because you want to insulate them to say, we still need you to be instinctual while you're learning these other things. And don't worry, this guy will hold the fort down for you in case things go sideways. And what we'd like it to be is sideways a lot less and a lot less and a lot less. And then ultimately you prove that you're better than that. And then now that, he's proven that is the case. So now you're in a position to where the two of them can play together and truly play off of each other instinctually. And they can and they have the same level of trust that each guy can carry the mail. Back in the early days of what we were hearing coming out of the way, like in the old days of Russia, when they were powerhouses, when you heard Tarasov talk about his line construction, was like, I put the top 3 players on that's one line. Then the next best 3 players, that's second line. That was their line construction. The top 2 defensemen, the two best guys we have, though they play together. Then the next two guys, they play together. And, you know, in our situation, and I'm a big believer in that, talent should play with talent. But in the NHL, it is incredibly difficult to do that because the pressure to win is so high and the parity amongst teams is so big, is so intense that you have to be able to defend if you're going to play big minutes, because you're invariably going to get caught out there with Nathan McKinnon. You're going to have to play that guy 20 minutes. That's a tall order. That requires you to make really smart decisions at given times. And sometimes you got to manage the game. And that's an important aspect. So you have to learn that there's an development arc to that. And I think that that's really important. Now, the fact that the two of them are on the same team and can play together is massive. Like, one of the interesting parts in Toronto was watching Morgan Riley. And Morgan Riley took off last year. It was like a career year for him, especially when we hit the playoffs. He really took off. And you looked at the work of Shen. Shen was unbelievable, but he created and insulated that. And you got the feeling, at least I got the feeling, that Riley had taken that step where he was now ready to move to what we're talking about here. Now, in Toronto, they don't have that extra guy to play there that's at that level like a Harley and Heiskanen. And so it does affect the development arc of Riley. He's ready to move on. They don't have the pieces to do it. Here, they have the pieces to do it. Harley has done the work. I think Suter did a brilliant job with them. My sense is put them together, let them play 25 minutes a night, redistribute now Suter into a better window of time where he can be more effective, because he's not going to be as effective. It's hard for him to be effective playing in the playoffs and playing 82 games, trying to run him 22 minutes a night. He's just not there in his career arc. No different than Shen. Shen could do it for a short period of time, but you can't expect him to do it for a long time. And that's why it has to evolve, and you have to have that next piece ready to go to jump in. And I love that they can do that in Dallas. And if it was me, that's exactly where I'd be going.
Well, and I love watching them play off each other, because you can see it on the breakouts how they can improve the conditions for each other when they have to play the puck, right? And that's a luxury that Miro just hasn't really had much of throughout his career. Like, he's constantly had to play on his offside to accommodate his D partner. He's had to play with, I think, less talented partners. And part of what's made him so unique is you talk about that sort of career arc for defensemen, right? He never really got that. Like, he stepped in and his game was so mature and he was relied upon so much from day one that he essentially just had to do it all right away. And so I think there's been a lot of talk about, well, you know, he's clearly a top defenseman, but the thing that's stopping him from that Norris conversation is the points and the offensive production. And I think you can't just view that in isolation. I think contextually it makes sense. But all of a sudden now, the idea of playing with a guy like Harley, I think it's going to free him up off the puck as well. And all of a sudden, you're going to have all of these additional opportunities for him to attack, him to have more space to make plays offensively. And I think if there is more there offensively for him, this is the best way to draw it out of him. And I'm really curious to see how much that pays dividends and what they can really accomplish with that, because I do think there's something potentially special down the road of playing these two guys together.
Well, if you take that even further and you take a look around the league, so take a look at the Ottawa situation with Shabbat. So Shabbat would have been very similar to what happened to Heiskanen. He comes in, he's kind of ready to go. And even if he wasn't ready, you go in, he's relied on offensively. So his problem is he did do the offensive work, doesn't defend particularly well. So he erred on the side of offense, wasn't able to really defend very well. Heiskanen was able to kind of come out of the gates, show some offensive flash here and there, but then has had to become more responsible as it's gone along and has diminished his offensive development because of that. Then you look in Ottawa and you take a look at Sanderson. Sanderson, I think, has tremendous offensive ability. He's erring on the side. He's like Heiskanen. He's kind of sacrificing a little bit. He's picking his spots. He's trying to be responsible, but he is being restricted because he's not quite in the situation that would allow him the ability and the freedom to play as instinctual. Harley has come in and he is in a situation now where he's had the proper arc. It's been a great arc for him to be on. And if you were to diagram an arc for a player like that, this is kind of how you would like to see it go. And now he's in position to where he can then play with another guy who's like-minded, who has the same level of, like, similar levels of instinct. They'll be able to see a play similarly, and that's what they'll be able to see that similarly and be able to take that forward. I think it's genius. And to your point, I think it'll be interesting to see if now that is the piece that pulls out some of this offense that I personally have been really dying to see out of Heiskanen, because he is a guy that you see flashes of it where you're like, oh my God, this guy is uber talented. Like, when is he going to get loose? And it could be this type of environment that does it. But he's had responsibilities at a young age that he's had to be able to attend to the sacrifice of his own development offensively, and that's what's put him in this particular spot. You could also create that argument with Drew Doughty over the years, that he was in that situation, and eventually when they got to winning, he took his offensive game and set it aside for basically like 7 or 8 years. Now this year there's been a lot of talk of him trying to come out, like, it's just been too long. And he's getting older now. It's just not, but where like Heiskanen's not in that spot. It's only been a couple of years. He's in a space where all of a sudden this lightning in a bottle hits with Harley showing up and being ready to go. I mean, he's well positioned, and that Stars team could be one of those teams that the offense that they get from the defense could be the thing that does put them over the top and put them in a conversation where they are perennial, like, cup favorites.
Well, especially because of the way they create offense, and they're really efficient this year. I think they're second in 5-on-5 goals. They're third overall, and they have a very defined two-pronged offensive approach, in my opinion. One is the rush game we talked about, and Harley certainly fits that. And the other is their work in front of the net, right? With Pavelski and Robertson and all the forwards they have up there in their top 6 in particular, but even their top 9 now, they're so good at this layered approach where they screen in front, they try to tip everything, and then once the rebound comes out, they're so quick to it, to retrieving it, and then getting it back on net and creating additional opportunities off of that, right? And I wanted to highlight Harley there because I think his goal scoring individually is getting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. Like, he's got 12 goals in 46 games. The only defenseman with more is Rasmus Dahlin, and he's got the same number of goals as Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar, except he's started playing like 300 less minutes than them so far this season. Now, I don't think anyone should expect Thomas Harley, or any defenseman for the most part, to consistently score at the rate he has, because as we talk about, scoring is very hard to do in the NHL, but particularly for defensemen. If you look this year, defensemen have scored on 2.3% of their shot attempts. Like, it's so exceedingly rare to shoot as a defenseman and score. The good thing for Harley, though, is I think there's a real strategy or process that I admire behind his shooting. And he scored the 12 goals, but for the most part, particularly in offensive zone sets, I don't really feel that he's actually shooting trying to score. It seems like he's shooting low strategically to try and make the puck available for his forwards in front to either get rebounds or tip the puck themselves, right? And so I think that's part of why I also think he really accentuates the way their top forwards play. And I want to talk a little bit about that sort of process and the way he works the blue line and how he shoots with that design in mind, beyond just, the approach we don't like, which is you get the puck, you wind up, and you shoot it as hard as you can, and you hope to dent something, whatever it hits, but you're not actually trying to accomplish anything meaningful. Harley's almost the opposite. Like, you'll see him uncork a slap shot every once in a while, but most of his shots, when I think about him, are him holding onto the puck, sort of waiting for a shooting window to open up, and then kind of wristing it and taking a bit off, but making sure it gets through, as opposed to just shooting it as hard as he can.
Yeah, I see two approaches with him. One of the big approaches that I think he does get into middle distance a lot, which is a hallmark of defensemen who score. They tend to score from middle distance, whether it's him activating off the blue line on the weak side and being available, whether it's him attacking the defenseman who's in front of him and stepping by him and putting himself in spots. He also attacks the middle of the ice and gets a lot of shots from the slot, which is, again, it's difficult to get there. You're going to have great stick handling ability and skating ability to do it. He has both, and he puts himself in great spots. I think that's a big part of his goal scoring. To your point, though, which is the actual play at the blue line, the one habit that he has that I love is he's when he's on the strong side and the puck comes low to high, when he grabs that puck, it's one crossover to the middle, and then he turns his body so his hips are now facing his partner, or towards like even more like towards the hash mark on the far side is where his hips go. So he's skating now. He went kind of laterally on the crossover. Now he moves and now he's going forwards, but on a slight diagonal. And he shoots off that inside foot. And it's got a little bit of more pepper on it as it gets off of his stick, but he's not winding up to do it. He's using his lower body and his skating ability to do it. It also creates great angles, and he's separating his upper body from his lower body. So from a technical technique perspective, he's checking all the boxes. The other thing that he does exceptionally well is he tends to shoot halfway up the net, which is the easiest puck for a forward to tip. When you watch Pavelski's goals, yes, he will score the one that's like the heater that's right along the ice and he kind of knifes it up in the air, or he'll like redirect it a little bit. But when I think of Pavelski, the most amount of times in which he deflects a puck, it's usually in the air about waist high. Those are the ones that he's exceptionally good at being able to get, and that's where the hand-eye coordination comes in. And a guy like Harley seems to have mastered that height, and he puts it in that position so that it's an easy puck for those guys to deflect, which is a little counterintuitive to what we used to say. We used to tell the defenseman to shoot it low, shoot it on the ice. And now, like, it's so difficult to get that puck through. So many of the shot blockers, they could take away that bottom part. They're essentially goalies themselves up at the point in the way in which they approach their shot blocking. So it's really difficult to get that puck through, especially like if you take any time at all, like winding up to try to do it, it's just going to be difficult to get it through. Harley is an exceptional skater. He uses his skating to get off the wall, to attack the middle of the ice, to go on slight angles. And then when he does shoot it, he puts it at a height that now if the tipper misses it, which often they might, it's now in an awkward spot for the goalie because it's above the goalie's pads, which they love. They like a puck that's low. Many goalies are impossible to beat from those distances when you shoot it along the ice because their butterfly is so good. But now it's in the guy's hands. There might be some traffic that he's trying to work around. And now the puck is in that height where he's going to have to use his hands. He's going to have to reach. Plus you have the anticipation of a guy deflecting the puck. There's a lot to it in terms of him being able to find some goals that happen from a sifter type shot that has, like I said, a little bit extra pepper on it because of the way in which he utilizes his footwork. It's a dangerous shot. He can score off of that shot, and he has, but he can also put it in positions where the guys who, especially on their team, where they funnel guys to the net, and those guys are exceptional in second layer tipping, because in order to tip when it's in the air like that, you like to have the puck be able to travel a little bit of distance. And so Pavelski is primarily in that hash mark or around the hash marks area when he's doing it, not necessarily right on top of the goalie. So, yeah, I think it's a perfect storm. I think Harley has really developed an excellent ability to shoot like that. But I also think that his shot is also conducive to guys who want to spend time around the net and deflect because he gives really good pucks for them to do so.
Well, and the Stars certainly have those guys, and I think they really benefit from those, chaos scramble situations down low, right? They're so good at feasting on that. And a lot of it is just like it's kind of marginal stuff. It's not necessarily anything that's completely game breaking, but it's all like either increasing your margin for error or giving yourself more outs in terms of a positive outcome, right? And so Harley's not just standing at the point going, all right, I'm going to try to pick this top corner here because not only from that distance it's so hard to do so, but the likelihood of just accomplishing that is just so minimal. Whereas in this case, you're almost creating this little buffer for yourself where it's like, all right, either there's so many things that can happen with this puck, whether it's a tip and generally it's not just Pavelski standing himself, like Robertson's in front of him. They're both trying to get their stick on it. And then with that many bodies in front, even if they don't get it, the goalie's going to have a tough time of corralling it and holding on to it cleanly. It's going to bounce in front. All of a sudden, we can jump on that and do something with it. There's just so many ways they can score off of those plays beyond him having to pick a corner and score it himself, which defensemen just don't often do, right? And so that's kind of what I appreciate about it. And if you are going to shoot from the point, I much prefer that to the alternative that we see from some other guys at the position.
Yeah, no question. I think it's outstanding what he's been able to do. And like I said, so many of the things that he's doing just puts himself in position to be able to have a positive outcome, which I think is exactly what you described, of the number of ways in which this could be a positive puck. He puts those pucks in there consistently, and so he does get positive outcomes. I mean, if you're just going to go up there and fire pucks right along the ice, or low, or that the puck is on the goalie's pads, and you're going to do that from 60 feet, I think 2.5% shooting percentage is probably going to be generous for you. You're probably looking at, you're really looking at a hope play at that point. When this guy's doing it, he's just kind of increasing the odds that there's going to be a positive outcome, and it doesn't have to be a goal. Even to your point, it could just be a puck that's awkward that the goalie cannot intentionally rebound. He's not like he's turning his blocker and putting it right to the corner. He's reaching at the last second and it just hits his arm. And then now that's a puck that's much more recoverable for the Stars to be able to continue their offense. So it doesn't have to go in to be positive. And I think Harley has done an excellent job. I think the other thing too is like Heiskanen's really good at this too. He puts himself in some really interesting spots and puts himself in some has an excellent shot himself. So between the two of those guys working up at the top, they get into this, like they can almost, like in the same way we were talking about the exits where Harley is basically two players. He's the guy, the retrieval guy, plus he's the weak side D joining. You don't now need a high 3-on-2 like you would traditionally look at it, because you have two so high profile, great skating defensemen. They can be three positions between the two of them, which opens up a now plethora of other options and opportunities that they haven't even had a chance to really explore yet. So if they were ever to say, you know what, this offensive blue line, if we work it, we could be three positions by the two of us. What would that do now to, Robertson or Hintz? What could Hintz do now rather than having to be in certain positions? What could he potentially do? And I often wondered that in Colorado, even though the 5-man unit with Makar and McKinnon and Taves, they get in that high 3. I often wondered, there's so many things that they could do because they have now three guys who could play all three positions, and they would only need the two of them up there. I think that does open up some other opportunities. Like, for example, could a guy just leave the offensive zone, and then come back in, which is an underutilized offensive tactic that you can now do because you have the trust that those two guys can manage the three positions between the two of them. So I think that there's a lot of options and opportunities that if these guys were to play for 3 or 4 years as a pair together, I can't even imagine what they could come up with together. That's what's so exciting. And that's why, for me, I'm really hopeful that the Stars find a way and they stay healthy enough in the other parts of their lineup where they don't feel like they need to break these two up.
Well, and you can see that in the numbers. They back it up. Certainly, when he plays with Miro, the numbers are through the roof. When Harley's on the ice with Hintz at 5-on-5, the Stars have scored 18 goals in 190 minutes, which is about 5.5 per hour, which is just outlandishly good. And so it's not by accident. A lot of it is how they facilitate each other and a lot of the concepts we talk about today. And Daryl, I'm glad we did this. Thank you for indulging me, because Harley's, as I said off the top, not only one of my favorite players, but I think there's so many habits that he's already showing right now that I think are very important for young defensemen to utilize themselves, right? And so I think if you're watching a guy play and the way he's able to create, I would take a lot of what Harley's doing and try to incorporate it into your game. So this was a blast, and it was good to do a defenseman finally because we've been on a string of forwards. I think Quinn Hughes was actually the last defenseman we did, and that was a couple months ago now. So we'll have to incorporate some more of these blue liners as well into our shows. We will be back next week with you. Everyone go follow Belfry Hockey, and we're going to have you on again next week as we pick a new player to deep dive, and we'll be back with the show in a couple days to close out the week here with more of the Hockey PDOcast on the Sportsnet Radio Network.